You can't see it, but in that drawer right there, I bought a 5-star multi-subject thing. And
Trapper Keeper? Did you say Trapper Keeper?
I wish it was a Trapper Keeper. You can't find them anymore. I would totally rock a Trapper Keeper. Welcome to the Road to Real Estate with Jon and Lauren, where we discuss becoming a new agent and how to get through this business. We're also on Instagram at the Road Real Estate. Ooh, it's cold out there. We can help you stay a little bit warmer with some hot coffee, so stay to the end of this podcast, and we can tell you how to make this Nespresso machine yours. Welcome back, everybody, to the Road to Real Estate podcast. I'm your host, Jon, and I've got the amazing Lauren Cremani with me.
Thanks, Jon.
Yeah. Before we even get started, like, subscribe, click the bell, and at the end of the show, we have an espresso machine we're giving away with the milk frother, which is what I'm drinking right now, and it's amazing. So stay to the end. Lauren, why don't you introduce us to today's episode? I wait till you drink to ask you. It's perfect.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, today in this episode, we're talking about the test and how to prep for it. Like, what does it look like to get ready for the big exam, and helpful tips that we used in order to pass our test along the way.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a tough one. If you've gone through it, you know what it was like. And for the rest of the people that are still going through it, it's dreaded. It's terrifying. Everyone you talk to, everybody that's in real estate knows somebody who's failed quite a few times. There's so many of us know,
I have a friend who is a broker now, and she probably sells 50 houses a year. She failed the test 5 times.
Yeah, that's a good thing to note. Just because you're failing the test does not mean you're going to be a bad realtor. It has no inclination in it. And one of the things that Lauren told me when I was going through it was just remember 80% of this you're not going to ever see again for the rest of your real estate career. It's important to know that the people that take the real estate exam, there's a lot of different jobs that come out of it. People are going for their brokerage. So people are going for property management. People are going for appraisals. So it's a wide array of information, and depending on what field in real estate you end up in, you may use this section or that section, and not the rest. I mean, obviously, as you go further in your career, you want to open a brokerage, then you got to learn a little bit more about the law stuff. If you end up going into appraisals after you've been a real estate agent, obviously, you've touched some of that again. But it is a pretty wide array of information, and because there's a wide array of information, there's this thing called vocabulary. You want to take vocabulary for a little bit?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways to do vocabulary, or maybe 2 different ways to do vocabulary, right? I mean, people make flashcards, super traditional. I went old school, like I summoned up the 4th grade version of myself, and I wrote down the vocabulary word, I underlined it, then I wrote the definition. I think flashcards would have been better, but it was very cathartic to feel like I was able to kind of step back into my old self in order to get that vocabulary down. But I think vocabulary is interesting because when you're taking this test and when you're studying or learning this, you have to learn it with the real estate filter on, right? There's other words that in life that are going to be on the real estate test, but they're not asking you what the generic definition is. They're asking for the real estate definition, right? And sometimes understanding that is the viewpoint or the filter you have to have on while you're looking at the vocabulary kind of helps.
100% agree. You can't see it, but in that drawer right there, I bought a 5-star multi-subject thing. And
Trapper Keeper? Did you say Trapper Keeper?
I wish it was a Trapper Keeper. You can't find them anymore. I would totally rock a Trapper Keeper. But no, the 5-star, the plastic cover. And it started out with, I'm going to read this chapter, and I'm going to pick out all these keywords that I need to learn. And I would get halfway through the chapter and be like, I don't know what they're talking about. But with the testing and the courses I took, they had a keyword vocabulary word before you started each chapter. And so what I started doing is write down all those keywords and write down all the definitions before I even started that chapter. And it made the chapter so much more comprehensible, and I understood what was going on. And then what I found was I'd finish the chapter and go, what did that word, what was appurtenance again? I don't remember. So I started making flashcards, and then I would write them all down there. I'm like, if I can't remember it, it then got transferred to a flashcard, and it was huge. Like, vocabulary is everything. If you know the definitions of everything, you're so much further into taking the test. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And I think that, when you're looking at vocabulary, it's really important to divide it into different sections. There's, just general terms that we talk about, like real property has a real definition. That's not just somebody saying, oh, real property, right? It is a definition.
It's real. I can see it,
I can see it, yeah. The other one is like personal property, right? We say personal property as our kind of vernacular, but really it's called chattel, right?
Yeah.
From the Old English, lords and
yes, a word that most people have never
and
used in their entire lives. Now you're like, oh, I do real estate. We got to use chattel.
Chattel. And it's important to kind of know where you come from when you're looking at the real estate test, because you have to understand that even though the real estate profession, in some form has been around professionally, when it came around, we were still in a very different time where we looked at land differently and people used words differently. And a lot of our words come from Old English and have different definitions than what we use in our common language today.
Of course.
And so it's important to kind of put that into perspective. What's a fixture? If I asked any of my friends what's a fixture, they'd be like, oh, like a faucet, like a light fixture. That's very normal. And although those are a real estate fixture, according to the definition, it's also any kind of personal property that has been attached, right?
Yeah,
anything that, conveys with the real estate. And so there's certain mental shifts that you're going to have to tweak. You don't want to just assume that you know the real estate definition of those words.
Well, it's one of those things that when I was doing the definitions, I was originally going into Google, and Google would give you a definition, and it'd be like, oh, this is what this means. And it's like,
Webster.
I understand how that works with real estate, and then it took me a while to figure this out. But inside of the app where I was getting the words from in the first place, they have a dictionary and a glossary in there, so I was able to go and get the real estate, what they meant for it. They had their own definition, so I wish I could remember those terms, because there were some terms I was writing definitions down. I'm like, I don't understand what this has to do with my job. And then you get in there, like, it has nothing to do with the definition I wrote. There's a completely different meaning for it in real estate that is for real estate, Having said that, like,
there's certain things that, like, I haven't really had to, you don't use all the time, but when they come up, you have to know them on your feet.
Yeah.
Like ownership and interest. Most of the time, I don't counsel my clients on ownership and interest, right? Like that is essentially the real estate attorney's job. However, there are often questions or there's information that if I give them ahead of time, they can navigate that sooner, better, quicker. It's just easier. Those are the kind of things that you have to be prepared to know. How can you own property? Even though those are vocabulary words, the practical application is super important.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're buying as a single person, sometimes you're married, right? That's one of the easiest ways to do it. Sometimes there's two people that are not married that need to define their relationship and how they're going to take the property. So those are all vocabulary words, but the practical application is so much larger.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, when you mentioned all those things, what flashed through my head was like warranty deed, limited warranty deed, title of property. And then you moved into the relationship, and like, so that's joint tenancy in common, all that stuff. You have to know. It's so important. And it really helps you answer the questions no one knows, because we mentioned this in the last episode about how the wording is so difficult and the way to do it. These are not like your high school tests. And I practice like crazy because it's been 23 years since I took a test before taking this test. It's been a long time. And it was like I said, the what they're asking for is really well hidden. There's not a lot of obvious wrong answers. So what I found was I would go through and look at the answers first before I read the question. And if it said warranty deed, limited warranty deed, quick claim deed, title of ownership, because there's always one made up one, and you would look at that and you'd be like, if you know what all four or three of those things is and what the upset, like what the one that doesn't apply to real estate is, then read the question. You're like, well, it helps you figure out what they're looking for because you know what those things are. And to me, it's doing a lot of that backwards really important. Like just because like that, like it does make it, because you read that thing and it's, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be, skip the question, read your answers, go, I know this, I know this, I know this. When you read the question after knowing all the answers, you immediately go, well, it's definitely not those two. And now you're down to a 50% chance of getting it right. And there's going to be a subtle difference between limited warranty deed and warranty deed, right? You know, one goes through all of time and one goes through the current owner. And knowing that small difference between them can answer that question for you. Does that make sense?
Right. And, one thing that I found super helpful is if I wasn't totally sure after I eliminated like those two wrong answers, if I skipped it and went to the next answer,
Definitely.
sometimes it confirmed like, well, this one is definitely limited warranty. So that one, is
Yeah.
special
Oh, yeah.
warranty.
There's definitely,
Right.
there's lots of circles on that test. So it definitely, I am pro skipping questions, because if you struggle on a couple in a row, you start to get frustrated. You're starting to think, oh man, I'm not doing well. And it changes your mental mindset for taking that test. Just hit skip, go to the next one. You might find 5 questions later, that question makes you go, oh yeah, I know the answer to the other one. It does give information away, because there's 152 questions on the Georgia test. I'm pretty sure it's pretty standard, 100 something for the national and then whatever the state portion is. But there's a lot of questions. So if you miss a couple, it's okay. Just skip it, keep going on. Don't get frustrated. What are some ways that helped you get through the test? Like, obviously we talked vocabulary. Was there anything else that you did specifically for the test to get you ready or get you through it while you were taking it?
You mentioned something that was really important that I don't know that I realized at the time, but when I look back in retrospect, it's very clear to me. Focusing just on that national, that big test, that final exam that you have to take before you go to your state test, that had different information because your state test obviously is state specific. And so there are definitely some things that I don't know that we use in Georgia. And by not realizing that I didn't need to focus on that, just focusing exactly on the material that they're giving me, not looking ahead to the state test. That was one piece that was really important because you have to wear different hats sometimes when you look at these tests.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really important for me not to look ahead. This is the test, this is the material, focus on this. Because like I said, if you said, hey, what's real property? Your friend has a definition of it, but that's not necessarily the test definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or fixture, or the words they have very specific meaning. And so focusing on that vocabulary and really knowing it forwards and backwards, I think is one of my tricks, because if you can't speak the language, then the questions aren't going to make sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that was the key thing. It is important to note that there is math on this test. So for some people, that is super dreaded and they don't like math at all. For me, I was the guy that was praying for the most possible math questions. It's like, there's something about me in math. I can sit down and read it and go, okay, this is it, and create my own formula and come up with the answer. I've always been built that way. I know lots of people out there are not built that way. So it's okay. It's not a majority of the test. I think I got lucky in my instance and I got 25 or 30 questions on it. But normally they say to look out for like 8 or 10, So you can technically get every single math question wrong. And some of them are super basic and still pass the test. So it's not the end of the world.
This may be a good time to say it. I believe that when they do the test, they are all what they call like dynamic testing, which means that not everybody receives the same test nowadays.
Oh yeah, there's thousands and thousands of questions, and they pull 150 for you. So I know there are people out there that get tests, and they study the test. You can learn every answer to every question on that test and go take the test and not say a single one of those questions, and you're wasting your time. Learn the material is really important. Like, go through your course. Don't try and rush through it. You got 75 hours. If it takes you 90, doesn't matter. It's more important that you learn that information. You'll use it for the test, and then some of it you'll never use again. But it is studying other people's questions isn't going to get you there. Learn it from the course.
Yeah, those practice tests are so important. I mean, I remember taking my first practice test and just going, whoa, I don't know this, right? Like just being dumbfounded. I mean, I was a good student, you know, I did well at school. And to completely bomb a practice test, I was just, you know, I was flabbergasted. And so to have that moment of like, I need to go back and get some more information was very humbling and also necessary. So those practice tests with the math, with the vocabulary are so,
Yeah,
so
I took a bunch. I took more than probably most people, and that was the thing. Is like I needed a litmus test to feel confident going in because of what everyone told me about how hard it was. So I went online and took multiple tests. I in the course I'd taken, they had a couple practice tests I could take, and I took those too. And what I found was, I think the first one I got a 63% on, which is failing, by the way. The number you're going for is 75 or higher. Anything below that, you failed. So you have to get a C or higher. And so it was a really good way because in the practice test, it told me what I got wrong. I was like, clearly, I need to learn these subjects. I need to work on this. And I took that test, I would say 4 times. And I consistently got an 85 at a point, and it just seemed like I wasn't getting any higher than 85. And it was because I was the way they're worded on these tests is so important. It would be like if you read it and you skim it, you're missing a word. There's so many keywords that go everything. Which one of these is not? Which one? Like there's so many things where there's a lot of trick questions that if you don't take your time and comprehend it, you're gonna probably get it wrong because you're like, oh, it's clearly this, and then you go through your answers, go, oh, I didn't see that word. Why? Because you're rushing. There's a lot of questions to get through, and you really get it's daunting because no one says this test's fun or easy.
and your
Everyone amps
adrenaline's
you up
up,
for it,
right? When
huh?
your adrenaline's up like that,
Yeah.
you just naturally are going to skim the answers. So taking the time to stop and read, because I will tell you that I don't know that I had. I mean, I guess it had been a while since college, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I have any experience where I feel like the questions were tricky. And when it came to real estate, they would intentionally put, like you said, the not in there. And then if you read the question wrong, they had the answer.
Oh yeah, there's a
You
lot
know,
of
they
those.
have the wrong answer in
On the
there that
math,
appears
they would do
correct.
that too. They would go, what is the monthly payment for your insurance or whatever? And of course they have the answer for yearly. So if you start doing the math and you get to a certain level in the formula, like, well, there's my answer. And then actually there's one more thing you got to do to give you the other right answer. So there's a lot of right answers. You just have to figure out, what are they looking for? Are they looking for the annual? Are they looking for the monthly? What is it per day? What was the closing date on that? Because if you give the buyer the closer date or the seller the closer date, both those answers are always going to be in there, and that's going to change it just a little bit. And that was one of those things, like when I first started doing the math, even though I was good at math, I would do it in my head, like, oh, it's this, oh, it's pretty close, and it's like 27.48 or something. And then you would go on there and it would be like 27.489, 27.486. I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta actually figure
Yeah.
this out. You can get ballparked, and a ballpark is not good enough. It's not. They're
No.
not giving you obviously wrong answers. They're all there, and you're like, oh, they could all be right every time. So you really gotta know your stuff. And what I found was helpful for me, and I stole this from another podcast. It's all about testing. It's just to test the question. So obviously we're not going over the actual questions here today. We're not doing any of that with you. There is a podcast called Aha Real Estate. It's like 100 episodes of nothing but subject matter for the tests. I highly recommend it. And one of the things he keeps talking about is like, you start to get stressed. Every couple questions, just stop, close your eyes, take a couple deep breaths, calm down, and then start up again and get that little reset. That little reset does so much. It's been like, when I took this test, it's been, like I said, 23 years since
Yes.
I'd done any real testing. I graduated college in 2001. It's a long time to go without a test. And college and high school, I was that kid that didn't study. I didn't do any of my homework, but it was easy enough that I could show up, and I'm not saying I'm an A student. I was not an A student, but I would pass it without any effort. I would get C's and B's and pretty consistently. This is not that.
Yeah.
You can't wing this one. It's so easy to fail. And I said I was not a note taker. I've got an entire notebook full of notes. Every single thing I wrote down, underline this. There are certain things you just have to memorize.
Is anybody else picturing Jonathan with a Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper, or is it just me? I don't know.
No, I get it. I should get one. I want a pretty unicorn.
Oh, I need to. I'll be on Amazon. I'm on Amazon now. Fine.
If one shows up, I will use it. You know my word. I will. I don't care what's on it. I had one that had a cool 3D thing on it. Oh, you don't even know.
Good. It'll be really good. Yeah. I think that knowing information is one piece of it, like what you said, Jonathan. Yeah. But, being able to apply it practically is what the test is really testing. And that kind of application is a deeper type of knowledge. So finding a study buddy or a group or some people is so important. You asked me earlier, what tips I had. The other thing that I said, I said it to you, I say it to everyone, is cram course.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not for the final exam for your test. Maybe that your system probably has one. There's probably something available for that. The practice tests are really good. But once you move from that national test to the state test, you need a local cram course. You can check your MLSs, the local schools around you. I'm sure they have some also online. We've mentioned Kaplan. Kaplan probably has one as well. But a cram course is a great reminder. I just think they're invaluable for once you get to that state test point, because you're so full of that national information. It's nice to go back and talk to someone or a company that has specific information for your state test.
Oh, I think that is super important. One of the things they preach to you in real estate is what's the thing every realtor has to be? Because we don't do it in Georgia. We have Bretta here. And
are you talking about fiduciary?
Yeah, the fiduciary.
In Georgia, we are not fiduciaries.
Yeah, we are Bretta, and it's a different thing. So you spend 75 hours learning about your fiduciary responsibilities to your client, and then you get to the state portion, and it's like, we're not fiduciary, we are Bretta. It's like, okay. And it was one of those things like, oh, well, but that was a lot of time, because there's a whole slew of things that go under that, definitions that fit under fiduciary responsibility to a client. We won't get into that because we don't use it. But
that's a great point, Jonathan, because even something like, we talk about surveys and meets and bounds and how do we define a property? The information, it seems very like abstract and it seems all over the place, but you have to think about, where are you living, right? Being in North Atlanta, we were one of the 13 original colonies. And, our landmarks, our roads are based on natural landmarks, which may seem odd for somebody who's in somewhere like Utah, whose whole entire city was built on a grid system once they could survey it because it's a nice flat piece of land. When, Jonathan, I think when you moved here, you're right around my car, and I told you, every time we pass over a river, we change counties.
Yeah.
And it is the funniest thing. It cracks me up every time. Like, oh, past a river, now we're in Fulton County. Now we're in Cobb County. Now we're in Gwinnett County. And that changes how people looked at land, how they divided land, and how land ownership was.
Yeah. For people that aren't from Georgia, Georgia has more counties than any other state, to a ridiculous number. I think it's 254 or 256. They put in a law to stop it because it's too much.
Yeah, there is a law that the number of counties we have is the maximum number allowed, and that in order to make a new county, 2 counties have to combine.
Which happens. Counties do combine, and then new counties come up. Whatever. Georgia's crazy.
It's actually something that comes up quite often. I live in Fulton County, which is the county that the city of Atlanta is in, and it's a very strange shape where it's really big on the top and it bottlenecks, and then the city of Atlanta is down here. And it's because Fulton County came and rescued this Milton County, which was an old farming community back in the day. And now that Milton is a very wealthy suburb with horse farms and $1-million homes, they would like to separate from Atlanta, and yet we are connected. So it's a little political over here about all that.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, it happens all the time. I hear about it like, oh, this county absorbed this county, but that's what created this county. And like, yeah, other states don't do this. You know that, right? I'm not from Georgia. I've never heard of this. I've never seen it. And I moved here and it's like, this is different.
It is different. Well, and when you look at our landmarks, I'm deep diving on Georgia here. When you look at our landmarks, it's funny because you need to look at them literally. Like, Jonathan, a road close to your house is Shallow Ford, right?
Yeah.
Which is literally the shallow ford that you could walk across the Chattahoochee River, right? Like, that is exactly what it means. Or I live close to Holcomb Bridge Road. That was the Holcomb family's bridge that you used to cross the river, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of very literal things that we say every day that
Yeah, there's not.
you
I
don't.
mean, the water's clearly changed here because there's a lot of ferry roads out there, and there's not a lot of ferries anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Or peach tree. We must have had a lot of peach trees back in the day.
Yeah.
So
It's very, very true. Another thing I found to help get back on subject here, we got a little tangent. That's fine. We like tangents. They're fun. As they do give you a piece of paper and a pencil when you show up to the test, and they will give you a calculator too. So if there's any information you're so afraid of forgetting and not having, like for me, I got in there and I immediately drew a township and I drew a section. And when you go through the course, that was the most baffling section, which actually ties right into what she was just talking about with meets and bounds and what is that, baselines, and I can't remember the vertical ones. See?
well, we don't use them here.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, we don't
honestly,
have them,
like
so.
that's not part of how we survey houses, and
Yeah.
so it's something that we learned and
Yeah, the surveyor section
forgot.
is a really tough section to get through. Any questions that were related to that I was afraid of getting wrong. So I immediately sat down and I started drawing out like my baselines. Prime meridian, that's the line. See? Just got the prime meridian lines and sections and townships, because there's math questions like, if you were in the northwest corner of this township, of the northwest corner of this section, of the northwest corner, and you have to divide down to that small square. I had to make sure I wrote all that down. How many acres are in a square mile? How many feet are in square feet are in an acre? I was so afraid of not having information or drawing a blank when those questions came. Do the same thing with words that you would like. If you were looking at them in your car and you're like, "Oh, I'm never going to remember this." First thing you do when you sit down with a piece of paper, write it down. It's there. You don't have to think about it anymore. Any information I was afraid of losing, before I even got into the questions, I wrote it all down.
For me, it was math, Jonathan. I actually practiced writing my equations, right? So, in addition to vocabulary words, I rewrote the equations a few times on index cards, and I practiced writing them, because as soon as I sat down, I wrote down those equations on my piece of paper. And so in my mind, it was pretty small. Like, did they give us a whole sheet? I don't remember, but in my mind,
it was small. They gave me several pieces of paper. I didn't use all of them, but they're there. Use them if you need them. And when you're done, you just throw it away. It's for you.
Actually, they took my papers. We were not allowed to take them with us because they didn't want us to write
just in
anything
case you
down
copied
out of it. So
that makes sense.
I don't know if they still do that. Antiquated.
I'll be honest, I don't remember. Like, I thought for sure I just threw them away when I walked out. I know I didn't leave the building with them. You know what I mean? I wasn't.
They may have made sure you threw. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I don't want my scribbles anyways. It's okay. They can have them.
Before I took I think it had to be my broker's test. Before I took my broker's test, some people in my office knew that I was going for my broker's license, and my broker, like, I was at a big company, so the owner, like, even bigger than the broker, the owner of the company heard that I was taking my broker's license, and he came up to me at a social event and started asking me math questions.
Oh no.
And it freaks me out so bad. He was like, "Well, what's the transfer tax on this property?" And da, da, da. And he kept asking me these questions, and I had a drink in my hand, and I was nervous. Deer in headlights moment. So I will tell you that I remember very specifically writing down those equations,
Oh, yeah.
so that if they were on the test, I was ready, because I wasn't going to be a deer in the headlights.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I had a lot of friends that were already in real estate, and I reached out to you because you're the one that was my guiding star. Oh. That got me into this industry. So you knew I was going for real estate and going through the course. My wife did, and a couple of our close friends were, but otherwise I didn't tell anyone. Not a word until after, like, I put it on, as soon as I passed, I put it on the internet. But, like, I was so afraid of failing and people knowing I failed that I just kept it a secret, went through my course, did my test, and the second I walked out of that test, there was a picture of me, like, They did it, you know, like. So then I reached out to every realtor I knew, everybody, just let them know, realtor, I did it.
You're so funny. I was even worse, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I was working a full-time job. Only my husband knew. I don't even think I told my parents. And I got my license. I have a family member that's a broker, stuck it under their brokerage, and I did absolutely nothing. I told no one. I did nothing. There was no post. Absolutely nothing for 6 months. And then after 6 months, I said, okay, I'm ready to jump in.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me 6 months before I even told anybody I got the license.
Well, there you go. But you did it. And that's the point. Look at you now. You got it. You're killing it. I mean, you got a little protege.
A little protege. That's so funny. You know, it's interesting. I think when you were saying before about, you know, you've kind of touched on it. I don't know if you even heard yourself touching on it, but you talked about when you start studying your mindset, you know, having the right mindset going in when you're taking a test, having the right mindset. You miss a couple of questions, don't fall apart, you know, move on to the next one. You can come back to those, you know, protecting that mindset. When I look at our like real estate in general and like working within real estate, above all the data and information I had to learn, there's a level of mindset that I had to learn, that it is a skill. It is a muscle. It is something that I have to control in my life in order to really maximize myself. And so I know we'll probably touch on that in later episodes, so we won't go too deep now. But I think that that is a skill that you need to have, and that to start developing it now with the tests, with the studying, that the self-discipline, but also the mind discipline is super, super important.
100% agree. Something we mentioned last episode that goes with that was the time blocking. We went on that, like a short tangent on it last episode. You're going to hear it a little bit right now, and I guarantee you're going to hear about it in another episode. If you don't time block, now's the time to start, especially if you're thinking about this industry. That self-discipline that she just mentioned, if you have a hard time with it, if you block a section of your schedule every day to go through the course, especially if you're doing it online and not in a class, that discipline of putting yourself to do a task that, let's be honest, going through this course isn't fun. It's pretty monotonous. There are times when you're looking at it and you're like, man, I'm on chapter 14. I've got 10 more to go. And then there's the state section. And there's a point where you start thinking about, man, this has been trying and I'm halfway, you know, and just putting that thing on your schedule and making sure you just keep trudging forward helps you develop to when you're actually a licensed agent, because there's going to be times when you don't have anyone blowing up your phone and you're making the phone calls and you're making zero, and it's less than zero. You're paying your brokerage, you're doing all that stuff, and you're just waiting for that next client. But you have to be motivated on yourself and keep trudging forward, because let's be honest, when you do sell a home, the amount of money you put in your pocket is quite a bit, but it's not guaranteed until everything's closed, you know? And so it's one of those things where it's not like your other job where you made it through this week, here's your paycheck. That paycheck's zero a lot of weeks. And then you do get that closing and it's like, oh, okay, that's why I do this. But there you have to make it through the slumps and be motivated and keep going forward and know that the big picture is coming. And so developing that while you're going through the course, know that this is your new life that we chose. We decided to do this to ourselves. So time block.
And I think, yeah, real estate does attract, you know, those entrepreneurs, the people who have that desire to be their own boss. It also attracts people that are more security and safety minded. And so some people may naturally gravitate towards that really tight schedule or that type of discipline. Well, there's others it's going to be a little bit harder to keep that in place, but it's so important. And using this test to start to develop those skills will just have you one step higher than the average agent going in. So I think that's a great point, Jonathan.
Yeah. Other things to help you get through this test. I know we mentioned it. YouTube videos. There's a million of them out there that have sample questions on them. Cram courses are good. Practice tests online are good. Be careful which tests you go to, because I did try one. I think is it Quiznos or Quizler or something?
Quizlers or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did one of those, and it was like the questions started coming up, and I was like, "This is wrong. I know it's wrong because I did my course and I studied. This question's wrong. There's no right answer." Like there was a couple of them, and then I ended up going online and googling it, and of course there were lots of people saying the same thing, like, "Hey, this isn't a very good one." But there are a lot of people that offer the course that will give you a sample set of questions for free. And there's a ton of web pages out there, and I went to so many just to see what questions they had, see how they worded it. Go to the next web page, go through their little test, go to the next page, go through their little test. Maybe I over prepped. I don't know.
I mean, can you over prep? I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
But
I mean, in the end, I got to the goal, so I did the right amount of prep, right? You know, I'm here now, and I couldn't be here without all that stuff, I'm sure.
definitely. Jonathan, when I think back to content that's super important, and we kind of touched on like surveying and vocabulary and all those kind of things, but one of the things that is federally across the board, a really, really, really big topic that you need to be aware of is fair housing.
Yeah, that's a good point. You got to know the dates.
Yeah, the dates are really important. Who is covered in fair housing, right? Who is who's protected in fair housing? There's also some words like redlining and
Yeah, that
blockbusting
was
and steering that have very specific meanings for
yeah.
people in real estate. And so when you do that, you want to be really careful that you have the most up-to-date information, because that changed only in the past couple of years. Adding, there are certain parts that
Yeah, I think they added
address
trans
people,
in 2000 something, right?
but only certain parts of that. They're only added in certain parts, not all of them. And that could be something that's different with your federal laws and your local laws. And just in our world right now, you need to be up to date on what is the current standard.
Yeah. The most important thing is people are allowed to live where they want to live.
And I sometimes I will tell you, I have honestly 100% heard fair housing violations in real estate. I have, and it has not come from a place of hate. It has come from a place of the agent. Um, the agent feels like they are helping
Yeah,
someone.
the best intentions, but they can be easily taken the wrong way. I totally get it. But
Mhm.
you'll be more comfortable here. This is what you're used to, and you're not even thinking about what that's implying. It's very important that you don't show houses only in a certain area. Even if a person says this is where I want to live in this town, give them extra. It protects you. They don't have to buy that house, but at least you can show that you showed them more than you know what I mean, than that area. Like if a client comes up to you and says, "I only want to live where other Filipinos live or other Indians live or whatever," you cannot cherry pick those houses to make sure they live exactly in there. You show them more than that. You know, if they choose to buy in that area, that's totally up to them. But you have to be able to show that you showed them other options as well, you know.
Yeah, and to that point, if you know that they want to be in a certain school district, that is not a violation.
Yeah.
Just limit it to that school district or that city name or that county. Those are not violations. But using any of the protected classes, that's where the violation occurs. So making sure that you're not making assumptions, that you're opening to whatever they want, and that they are giving you the guidelines. You are not telling them where to go.
I mean, as an agent, when we're looking for houses for people, if they say they want to buy at $500,000 and that's what they want to do, we don't send them just $1,000 house. We give them a range a little higher than that, a little lower than that, because they may see something a little bit more or a little bit less that fits their needs. We don't. I mean, if someone wants a 4 bedroom, 3 bathroom, we don't just send them 4 3s. We put them 4 3 and higher.
Mm-hmm.
Because who knows? But yeah, so if we do the same thing when we're showing them areas, I always give them a little bit more. They want to be in this town? Cool. Well, this is right next to this town.
Mm-hmm.
It's 10 minutes away. It's worth the drive. You know what I mean? So I think you just apply that to everything, and it protects you and your client.
Definitely. Yeah, it's one of those sticky things that I see people accidentally say, because even talking about crime statistics, not everybody has the same idea of what is a safe area.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that with some people that I've seen or that I've coached or that I've worked with, they'll tell me the rules they have. Like, oh, you don't want to buy a house with 2 yellow lines. Speaking about the
That's my
road,
wife.
if it has double yellow lines, it means the speed limit can be higher, at least in the state of Georgia, right? The 2 double yellow lines versus like a neighborhood street that has no lines, or a small, like maybe through street maybe has one line or a dotted line. And so I said, well, you need to be careful. That might be considered steering
Yeah.
because you're telling them, what type of house to buy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. You mentioned the crime thing. I was talking to a client, I'll say a week and a half ago, and they're moving to a part of Georgia that neither you or I, it's not in our near area, had heard of. And they had questions about the property, so I did a quick Google, and there was the crime report. And I didn't know if I was violating anything by giving them that information. They were buying in a gated community on a country club. It wasn't going to directly affect them, but the town that country club was connected to was rough. Just the best way I could say it. I mean, it was 45% higher than the average violent crime rate in anywhere across the U.S. That's not a small amount. And so it's like, well, this is the information I see, but I didn't say anything good or bad about the information. So I don't know if I violated anything there because all I
So
did was a Google search.
yeah, I'd have to look and see what you gave, but typically I tell my clients to inspect the crime themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll give them a few different zip codes and area codes, because I know the area that you're talking about. That is such a small demographic, right? That's not a super
That's another
populated,
thing because of
not
the
a city.
population. One or two things that from one person can change the numbers.
Yeah,
So,
drastically. I mean, it
yeah.
changes it per capita. And so sometimes the information we have, although it could be accurate, it can also be misinterpreted. And different areas have different things. Now, as a realtor, I do have information, right? Like I know sometimes I've worked with people in law enforcement and I talk to them. I say, hey, in this area, is there anywhere that you would not purchase yourself? And, I kind of keep that in my mind, and it affects value, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so this is not something where I'm necessarily taking that information and publicizing it and giving it out, because that would be a fair housing violation. What I do is that when I'm talking to people, it's something that I would want them to be able to discover and talk to them about it. And so looking at that is really important. Also, even as simple as which schools are the best, sending them websites or asking them to research it, or telling them to go onto a Facebook group and ask there what
Mm-hmm.
they think about the area. Those are all ways that people can find out that information without you being the
You
source
putting
of it.
yourself in jeopardy. That's real smart.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So one more shameless plug at the end of this video, which is coming up real soon. Nespresso machine comes with a frother. That froth milk is epic. Please stay for the end. Do the QR code. There'll be a link in the description down below. And I think that's all we're going to do for today. Are you feeling good with what we've accomplished?
Yeah, go take that test. Ace
Yeah,
that
that's the
test.
thing, is get it done. Once it's done, you don't have to deal with it again. Until you decide to become a broker, then you got to do it again and do better.
It's
Right?
way more fun it's way more fun and way more difficult when you're a broker, but I highly recommend it.
Yeah, of course. You just got to do real estate for 3 years before you can do that. So.
It might be different for the state.
Oh, is it different state to state? Oh, man, I just give false information all the time. I'm so good at it. I can steer everyone here wrong. That's why I'm the rookie, right? All right, everybody. Have a fantastic one. We'll see
Thanks,
you
guys.
next week. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. You can scan a QR code in the lower left-hand side of the screen or click a link in the description. Have a fantastic one.